Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, September the 27th edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk Community Meeting. We have a special edition of the meeting today where we're going to discuss some of the issues surrounding the sale of the Maker tokens to the A16Z. Are they a company, a foundation, a group? What are they?
They're a crypto fund.
Crypto fund, just a fun thing, and maybe explore some of the philosophical implications of that. And if time allows, we're going to dig into our continuing on discussion around Stephen's scientific risk framework and see if we can get into correlation risk and economic capitals and stability fees. We're going to kick it off with some high-level stuff. I think that, looks like we have an expert who might have joined. We can field some questions as well. Maybe just to get things started, we can talk about, from a high level, what is the sale all about, Stephen, and what does it do for Maker, and what does it do for A16Z, I suppose?
Well, I think the first thing you have to consider is the environment and the landscape in which we operate. That is fundamental to understanding strategy. It's fundamental in understanding the longevity of this industry as a whole and what we represent in this industry. Now, to break it down, it really is pretty simple. How do you create an economy? How do you actually go about creating goods and services to put on a blockchain so that folks can augment onto the traditional economy and create this sort of wonderful new idea called the blockchain economy? In order to do that, you need to have manifestation of legal rights and obligations attached to these goods and services. So wherever you are around the world, you unfortunately will be under the guidance and jurisdictions of certain legal frameworks and certain regulatory frameworks. You can be, and this is the exploration that we're going down right now, I think we're all going down in the crypto space, is that we have created the first de facto full international implementation of a system. Because most folks would think, well, that's what the internet is. That's what the banking system is. Well, for all intents and purposes, it kind of really isn't. It's more like a combination of networks together. It really isn't a true singular distributed network. This is the first time this has happened. So we're going to have ourselves clashing up against the jurisdictional prerogatives of legislation and regulation. And that really is, it is so new, it's so watershed, that it has to be looked at appropriately and defined with a lot of consideration. There is a lot of learning to be done from both sides of the counter, from the regulatory side. As I understand it, the regulators are looking at this and they're going, this is really cool, this is really new, but what does it really mean? And ultimately we are, as the regulators, they have a primary incentive to look after consumers. They have a primary incentive to look after the public good. And really all they want to do is ask the question, how can we best do that in this new world, in this new framework, in this new environment? Now, it seems kind of simple. You think, okay, well, why don't we all just sit together and discuss these sort of things? But it really isn't, because you have to understand the landscape and you have to understand the avenues that you need to take in order to have the correct conversations. Because it's not so much the case of saying if you have the incorrect conversation, everything ends. It just, if you do have the incorrect conversation down the wrong avenue with the wrong set of people, then you're just going to delay things. And that delay is not just a burden upon Maker, it's actually a burden upon the crypto world at large. So what this relationship has done is it's given us this wonderful map where we're going to sit back and say, well, what does the regulatory world look like? What are the specific points that we need to think about? How do we partner with the regulators? How do we do this? It's all very, it's a really huge prospect. And consequently, we need to have a guide. We need to have a guide who is profoundly knowledgeable about this landscape, who has a good sense of other lawyers out there, other representations who've got very specialist points of view about these particular roads that we can take. So collectively, when you bring it together, we can actually engage with the legal aspect and with the regulatory framework that really benefits us all as a whole. The sort of value propositions we get out of this is discovering things that weren't possibly seen before, like what do we think about Ether? What do we think about Bitcoin? How does that translate into something like Maker? What does Maker truly represent? What are the categorizations that we need for these tokens? But what are the categorizations that are required in the United States versus the European Union? All of these things are interconnected, and they're extraordinarily large. They're huge. They touch on basically the international framework. And you can't think to go into this international framework with just an arbitrary partner and have the sense that you're going to be able to find the end of this rainbow. You truly need to have someone that's got a very profound view of how this whole thing works. So partnering with A16Z Crypto is really helping us clarify what this is, what it means, and what paths we need to go and take.
So that's interesting. So the value they bring is, so they're used to dealing with organizations in sort of this rarefied air that most people in our space don't really have an opportunity to interact with or have a history of interacting with. So they can sort of act as translators. They understand our world, and they also understand this other world that might be foreign to most of us and how to navigate that. It's interesting.
Correct. I mean, this is a bridge. And the thing is, the bridge is for partnering with the required regulators in order for them to understand what it is that we're doing, and for us to understand what it is that they are trying to achieve. And that partnership is going to be something that is, it's going to be long lasting. You don't go into the regulator, get a rubber stamp, then leave. Mm-hmm. You go to the regulator and you need to show that you are willing to be compliant, willing to be understood, and willing to actually teach at the same time. Because they're not these silly people sitting in a void. They really are extraordinarily active individuals, and they're actively looking for information, points of view, perspectives. They want to understand what the abstract means. They want to know what the abstract means in terms of their current framework that they have. And they want to find the intersection where this whole thing makes really great sense and allows us to push forward as an industry appropriately. So, to have that vantage point, to know which lawyers out there have a good sense of certain aspects of regulation is extraordinarily important. We ultimately want to get a sense of how to work within this jurisdictional framework appropriately and in a manner that allows all of us to get a good sense of how to push the blockchain economy forward. It's really big. It truly is.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. So I know that it's early days, but something that's I've always been sort of curious about is what types of relationships do organizations have when this type of investment comes in? Is it a matter of somebody's on the phone, like there's a hotline that you can ask these experts any particular questions that might arise, or are there regular meetings that occur, or is it I guess I'm just trying to get a scope of the relationship that forms between and a fund like this and the organization.
So what you've got is the true sense of a partnership. And what that means is that you're going to be each other's sounding board. You're going to support each other. And at the same time, you're also going to butt heads. And for me, butting heads is the most important part, because you kind of need that red team to say, well, yes, that's your perspective, but from our experience, we have this perspective. So we need to basically come to a conclusion as to what it is that we ultimately want to do. Because right now we've got a whole bunch of unknown unknowns. But when we partner with them, we can turn some of these unknowns into known unknowns, at least. It sounds like one of those weird sort of Rumsfeld things. But essentially what we're trying to do is say, okay, there is a certain amount of uncertainty. Let's clear it up, and then we can actually turn it into something that we have to really think about and can make a decision upon. Where beforehand, it was really a case of, well, who knows, let's just stay away from it. And that doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't help anybody. So the interaction that we have with them will literally be a case of, well, we need to consider what the strategy is with respect to business development. What about your marketing? Is this the right time to market? What guys out there do we need to talk to with respect to getting impact through certain periodicals, through certain blog spaces, through certain digital media? How do we, and this is the most important one for us as well, is how do we interact with the other assets on their portfolio? I mean, there is wonderful synergies to be had there. We don't stand independent in their portfolio and just be serviced from a singular point of view. We are going to be interacting profoundly with all their other assets in their portfolio to the extent where it is feasible, to the extent where it actually adds value to them as well as to us.
That raises an interesting point, because in the crypto space, we're fairly insular, I think. Sometimes we create partnerships with other people in the crypto space in order, with the laudable intent of sort of dogfooding our own ecosystem. But sometimes it's harder to reach outside the sandbox and start talking to more traditional organizations or traditional software companies. Is that something that AZ16 can do for us? Because they have a long history in the traditional software space of fostering these organizations. Is there an opportunity for getting introductions to companies that we probably wouldn't interact with otherwise?
Absolutely. I mean, that is, for all intents and purposes, one of the great value adds that we're getting. A16Z Crypto, they have a network, a value in that network that is now available to us. The ability to tap on that network, to lean on it, is extraordinary. It gives you opportunities that we didn't have before. We're looking at the use cases of DAI. Everybody looks at it from a retail point of view. But if you have a look at it from an enterprise infrastructure point of view, we could supplant a lot of the infrastructure that is currently used in these large enterprises. But you're not going to do it by, trying to get a coffee shop to accept DAI. You want to get the entire franchise to accept DAI. And you're not going to do that by just trying to take that one opportunistic point of view. It doesn't mean you don't take that opportunity when it presents itself. If there's a local mom and pop store down the road and they wish to try and use DAI, by all means, let's go and do it. But essentially, if you want to get into the full economic framework that is what ideally the blockchain is going to be, you have to supplant the infrastructure at the enterprise level so that it benefits everyone appropriately. And the only way you're going to do that is through appropriate networking, someone vetting you and saying, big guy with all that heavy infrastructure, it can be made more efficient if you use folks like MakerDAO.
There's an interesting knock-on effect here too. I guess we use the word signal a lot in this space, but there's some signaling happening here as well, isn't there? Beyond just the connections or the introspection and the advice that they can give us, the fact that they've shown sort of this confidence or this interest in the foundation or in what we're doing might incline some of these larger partners to take us a bit more seriously, or view us as not just another fly-by-night stablecoin. Is that part of the?
That is essentially another prime component of why this relationship is so important. The fact that Andreessen Horowitz have created a fund specific to focus on crypto is extraordinarily important. It says something about this space. It's telling folks out there, even in the traditional tech land that haven't really considered blockchain, that, you know, this is something you need to consider. They have made certain institutions that previously would not even have thought of blockchain to start thinking about it. They're opening up this blockchain economy and they're making it relevant to people. And that relevance will obviously have a knock-on effect to us, because as far as I'm concerned, MakerDAO, the primary function of MakerDAO is to facilitate economic growth. I mean, the use of a stable coin is essential to the value proposition in transactions, and transactions are effectively the foundation of any goods and service. So essentially, we are facilitating the growth of this blockchain economy, and they are making it relevant. They are making it authentic. They are making it a concrete perspective that allows people to see that this isn't some sort of fly-by-night. This is actually a value add onto the traditional economy that's going to release not only efficiencies, but even the possibility of new goods and services that people have not, you know, previously considered before. And we are partnering with them in order to realize a very similar vision, which is, you know, I don't think I need to, you know, hype it anymore. It sort of talks for itself.
Well, actually, I want to jump into something that's been on my mind for a while, and then probably we're going to lead up to a question that might be on a lot of people's minds, but if, I'll wait to see if somebody else gets there first. But I want to set up, we're seeing some more names, some familiar names and some new names in the chat. And I want to shift the way that we do the Q&A session in these meetings a bit more, where I would like anybody in the chat that feels like they have any questions to, as usual, feel free to jump in. But also feel free to sort of set this round robin debate sort of idea. So anybody has an opinion or a comment, throw it out there, jump on the mic or jump in the chat, let us know about it, and we can start getting into some details. I know Lanre has been waiting patiently for almost a week to ask a question about AZ16. So did you get your mic straightened away, or did you want to type it up?
Yeah, my mic's fine. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So my question is, so Rune, especially on Reddit, and you've kind of touched on part of the justification with the A16Z deal was some of the legal expertise that some of the guys there, especially Katie, would bring. Could you give a bit more light onto some of the particular and specific legal problems you guys have been mulling on in regards to DAI and MakerDAO? Was it more specifically about something like MakerDAO's, like a MakerCoin's position as a security or not, or whatever, or was it more to do with just general around the DAI stablecoin system and what financial regulation may or may not apply?
So firstly, the phrasing of your question, if you don't mind, if I can just rephrase it, it's not so much a legal issue, it's more like a legal conundrum. We're not facing a thing and going, oh no, we have a problem. We're actually into a landscape where we're going, well, what does this mean? And that's essentially what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out what ultimately MKR tokens mean. What do they mean in terms of a category? What do they mean in terms of jurisdictional regulation? And once we have a meaning to that, once we have a categorization, then you've got the ability to figure out what you can and cannot do with it. So these legal sort of uncertainties is why we're trying to engage with the appropriate authorities in order to partner and start talking around the points of what this actually means. There is so much conjecture out there in terms of, oh, this is it, or this is something else, but ultimately nobody really knows. So you can flail in one direction and go, oh, but it's so like a security, it's got to be a security. And then you can go into another direction and go, well, it's got nothing to do with the security. Essentially, we got to find a way of getting to a point where we can deduce what this means from a more substantial framework. Most of the media out there, most of the phrasing out there gives you an ambiguity, because it just depends on which way you look, you're going to get a different interpretation. And I really don't feel that we need to try and pursue this ambiguity. We need to go and find a sense of clarity. We need to get this clarity as soon as possible. Or else what you're going to find is that this crypto economy that we're trying to build is just going to consistently stall, because someone's going to come up with a fantastic idea. They're going to take it to a point where it's past their programming and they really want to implement it. And then they go to a lawyer and the lawyer goes, well, you know, I don't think you should because I don't know. And I've seen that 1,000 times. Everything sort of stalls on the basis where you go, I don't know. And the guy has to make, or the guy and the girl has to make this decision. Shall I proceed forward knowing that I don't know, or shall I just stop? And consequently, what you have is a stalling of this blockchain economy just due to the fact that there is no real sense of clarification. Now, the regulators are in such an important position, they can't all of a sudden just come out and go, I deem it as this, because the consequences are absolutely massive. Every time a regulator says something it is profound in its implication through so many points of legislation. So partnering with them and trying to find out what a reasonable sense of what it is that we're doing and how we can categorize it will allow us to actually become a little bit of a vanguard for the rest of the folks out there, where they will see that, oh, if we are going to be more or less in this kind of context, then we pretty much will be fitting in that sort of regulatory space. And we are going to be at least accepted. So given the fact that we're not doing something, you know, wholeheartedly wrong, we feel a lot more confident about going forward. The regulators work on probabilities. We work on probabilities. The probability of the consumer being looked after and the public good being looked after. So in essence, if you want a legal conundrum, that's the one we have to figure out. Do these organizations that want to become goods and services on the blockchain, do they serve the consumer in the way that, you know, they purport to? And how can you protect the consumer at the end of the day? I mean, if you can resolve that, at least to a certain level of confidence, you've got an economy that you can grow appropriately. So to your first question, what legal issues? Well, it's not legal issues, it's a legal conundrum around every facet of the Maker system, from DAI to the CDP to Maker tokens to every aspect about it. All of that is really a case of trying to find out what that means in a specific regulatory space. There was a bit of a monologue, I apologize, but hopefully I answered your question.
Cool, you did. Thank you.
I promise to make my answers a bit shorter.
Lanre, if you have any more, feel free to jump in. There's a lot to cover here.
Lanre, he's not going to ask me any more questions.
We promise there's no more monologue. I also want to, I typed it in the chat, but I also wanted to remind people that these conversations, these calls are for people at MakerDAO as well. We're getting to be a large organization, so this chance to interact with Stephen is for everybody. So if we have any questions, please jump in. And I see that Kenny's here as well. And I think that Kenny has a unique perspective, being one of the original Maker members. So if you have any questions, please jump in. So the thing that I'm curious about, I think that largely the reception internally, or at least in the community towards this sale, was fantastically supportive, almost universally supportive. A few outliers, but that's just math for you. But we had an interesting comment in Twitter from Meltem Demirors, who's, I'm a huge fan of her and the things she does and says, and she raised some interesting points, which I completely disagree with on the very face of all of them. But there's some interesting things to be unpacked there, and what she was talking about is this idea that there's this interesting intersection between what a DAO is and what it's supposed to do, what a foundation is, what it's supposed to do, and what a governance system is and what it's supposed to do. And this is sort of a triad with a Venn diagram, I think, if you wanted to imagine it. And the assumption, I think, the immediate assumption that some people come to is they see the word DAO, and they assume that, okay, this business is run by committee. And maybe that what I just said was a bit too pejorative, but one of the things that I'd like to discuss a bit is how we envision decentralized governance happening, what that actually means, and if we are in a position yet to draw bright lines between what governance does and what the foundation does and what the responsibilities of those two groups are. That was a bit rambling, I admit, but do you see the conundrum here? So we're at the very, very early stages of what governance
of responsibilities, basically.
Exactly. So do you have any insights or do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah, the demarcations are somewhat blurred. I mean, you've got to keep in mind that MakerDAO hasn't been deployed as a battleship yet. I mean, this is always the analogy. Oh, sorry, I got an itchy nose. This is always the analogy that I use. You have to, MakerDAO is effectively a battleship that we are building in harbor. We are applying all kinds of engineers, architects, and whatnot to make this battleship right now. And in order to go ahead and make this battleship, you have to have a certain amount of infrastructure deployed at a certain time. There are certain things that you do need to understand as as a principle for the battleship as a whole. I kind of see MKR token holders being sailors on the ship. So, if you want to have a guiding principle of how to act on the ship, well, yes, you need all the sailors to get together and agree. But if you want to, figure out if you need a rotor on the ship, well, I don't think you need sailors to agree. You just need to build it. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that, you differentiate between something that principally organizes how the ship is run versus how the ship is built. And what we're doing right now is saying, to a certain degree, we have a better perspective from a foundational point of view on how we need to build the ship, not run it, not decide on its fate and how it's going to be used, but just literally what the structure looks like. Once this ship is deployed out into the ocean, it's all on the sailors. This now becomes the full sense of what decentralized means. It's all on the sailors to decide what is required. You're going to have certain folks on land looking out for the ship and making sure that there are certain things in place and things are working appropriately. But essentially, the way that ship is run will be up to those sailors being MKR token holders. But ideally, the concept that needs to be incorporated in everyone's mind is that this isn't a binary event. You don't get up one day and say it is a DAO and therefore it is. You need to basically transition appropriately and then give that. It's not just the power, because it's already there. The power to decide how the ship is ultimately going to be run is up to the MKR token holders. But in order to make sure that this thing is built appropriately and that it has gone through the necessary testing, like formal verification and auditing, it's extraordinarily important. We need to have this in place. Or else what you're going to do is you're going to say, well, is everyone happy? Well, nobody has a singular perspective on the whole system to actually check it off and go, yes, we're happy. You need to have the professionals that are on shore look at this and say, this thing is sound. The engineer who's built this signs it off. The quality assurer who's tested this signs it off. And once all that is in place and we know that the structure is sound, it can then be deployed. So the foundation angle versus the DAO angle versus the sailors get to vote how the ship is made. Well, to a certain extent, a ship has a certain construct that needs to be in place. If there are certain things that are going to make the the principles of organization on the ship require new structures, well, yes, that can be voted on. But we have to start off with a singular structure that actually works. If somebody wants something new moving forward, they can have it, not a problem, because it will really be up to them. And it'll be up to them to decide who makes it for them. It'll be up to them to decide how it is and when it is. But for now, what we're trying to do is say, yes, we do see those sort of blurred lines, but it's because we are probably the furthest than any other organization out there to actually realizing the full sense of decentralization. So to sit back and poke holes in it and go, well, all the sailors need to go and decide if Andreessen is a great partner is a little bit, it's a bit of folly, because it's the same as saying, well, do you need a map on board? I mean, the answer is yes, you do. If everyone decides they don't like that kind of map, they want it pink, blue, or yellow, well, then we're talking about semantics that could be dealt with at a later stage.
Yeah, it was an interesting point, and it surprisingly lacks sort of nuance, this Twitter thread, because it's the road to decentralized governance. We've mentioned this more than a few times, is a long and bumpy one that we're seeing. It will take years, but the sort of deal flow that just happened with Andreessen, in my mind, will be probably at the very end of that very long and bumpy road, as the type of thing that would be managed by the community or an organization, a subsection of the foundation or of distributed governance, where we are currently at the spot where we've just had a vote, where we've ratified what we think a foundation actually is. And that's a long way away from negotiating a very complex business deal that requires a pile of diligence and a pile of insight and a pile of discussion. That's interesting. Kenny, did you want to mention what the comment you saw from Follow the Chain? I've been following him as well, and there's a lot of really smart things happening in that Twitter feed.
Yeah, thanks for the turning it over. So the comment from Follow the Chain on Twitter and CoinFund Slack was essentially, we see, I think most of us here are fairly confident that at some point there will be so much locked up in this ecosystem of CDPs and governance that any contentious hard fork coming along with Ethereum, the maker community will have to be engaged with that, because if the maker community says we don't recognize that chain over there, the collateral over there isn't good on our system, that will have a massive impact on people's financial positions on which fork to choose. So in that sense, we kind of see ourselves as being part of the overall Ethereum governance, not just amongst ourselves and internal governance. But our internal governance is stake weighted, meaning those with the most tokens have the most voice. And now that A16 has a significant portion of that, the comment made by Follow the Chain was they've essentially purchased a seat at the board for the Ethereum Foundation. So I just wanted to bring that up and hopefully maybe get a bit of a comment on that narrative.
That's actually a very typical situation where you have this sort of plutocratic ideal that you unfortunately start with any organization that's about to take off. It is something you need to face. It's something that you need to deal with. It's something that you need to have a very clear scientific, and this is why we use this in scientific governance, to make sure that it's not this influence of large stakeholders, but more the case of rigor in terms of its debate. Now, I don't think we are there perfectly yet, but we're getting there to the point where we have to ask a very hard question. And that question is, what is good for the organization? Because what is good for the organization may not necessarily be the same good that 90% of MKR token holders wish to see. As an example, if MKR token holders all got together and 90% of them decided that, we want to have, DAI turn into an IOU token. I mean, it is contrary to the singular purpose of what MakerDAO is. So there you can actually see a very good example of that which is good for the system does not necessarily translate from that which is wished for by the MKR token holders. So that is a wonderful edge case to think about, and that really shows that you've got to try and figure out a governance that focuses always on the singular purpose of the system. And that is why, in my opinion, MakerDAO is so profoundly important, because it has a singular purpose. If you found a DAO that had several purposes, the permutations would be such that your governance, be it scientific or not, will essentially create a stalemate. Because you have a singular purpose, you can actually see very clearly that if there's someone who is voting against that purpose, you may be able to do something about it. Now, when that happens and how that's going to happen, I'm not terribly clear on. I don't know how we're going to manifest this governance, which allows for the organization to look after itself appropriately and not become subject to some sort of dark premise where people can be, the votes can be proxied, cartels can be formed, and influence can be affected. It really is a case of saying, well, if you keep it singular, it becomes clearer when you do have a cartel forming that is trying to push in a direction that is other than that purpose.
It raises a really interesting point, Kenny, and there's another good insight, Stephen. But before we started the meeting today, we were talking about that thread, that Twitter thread, and the point I was making was in the good old days, if there was a chain split, then everybody just got twice as many tokens, and maybe half those tokens were not as worth as much as the previous batch. But after that, we all just sorted it out and picked the chain. In the future, or maybe even already, things have changed where there's multi-million-dollar businesses, large infrastructures that are sort of embedded on a particular chain, and a chain split doesn't automatically imply that UIs will be doubled and Oracle systems will be doubled and governance systems will be doubled. So a winner has to be chosen. And the conversations have been focused around who gets to pick, because it's no longer miners and developers and wallet owners. It's miners, developers, wallet owners, and dApps. And I think that there's a dawning realization that dApps are the ones that will be picking the main chain in the future. And I'm not entirely sure that Maker would be the leader in any kind of a decision-making process like that. I think that it would be probably a group of the top 10 projects on the chain or in Ethereum, and potentially as a next step, the real deciders will be whoever's embedded enough collateral onto the chain will be the leaders that we follow. So A16Z's investment in us does sort of give them a seat at the table, but it's a vanishingly small seat when you take into account the rest of the players in the space, and say a REIT that has $1 billion in real estate on the chain as well. Did we have any other questions that people wanted to ask? I'm not seeing anything. Thomas, was that you saying yes?
Yeah, kind of. My question is, do you guys believe that it would be beneficial for Maker to fund, if there would be another core developer group which would work on the core DAI system? Do you guys believe that it would be beneficial for Maker to fund another group? Like it's something similar, like clients. Bitcoin has only like one client, and it's kind of dangerous in my view to have only one client for one blockchain.
That's an interesting point. I would suppose that if it really is a case of making it a proposition where the competition creates a better system, then I don't see why not. I mean, if ultimately that's what you're talking about, is getting that the sense of robustness through a diversity of competing programs, then why not? I mean, that is really for the MKR token holders to decide on. But essentially, it really is a case of if you start off with a structure, because right now you are formulating an idea given a certain structure is in place. But given that we've deployed this thing out into the ocean, and if a whole bunch of MKR token holders decide, actually, you know what, this system could be a little bit better, then by all means, go and mandate folks to design it a bit better, then obviously deploy it where necessary, and then use the features and the functions of this battleship to make it a bit better. Because essentially what you're doing is you're creating governing dynamics. And if that governing dynamic turns the rotor of that battleship a bit quicker, or allows it to maneuver a bit better, then why not? I don't see a problem with that.
I mean, it's kind of preparing a second ship, which is like a backup ship.
It could be. I mean, you also could probably find that it's a ship within a ship. You know, if you find the big one doesn't work, everyone jumps in the small one and goes. You know, you could also have a submarine attached. The point being is that there is, you know, all the analogies that I make, they sound farcical, but essentially they are, you know, very apt, because there are many ways that you can get, you know, to manifest the realization of what this governing dynamic is. And there are many ways that you can actually employ it. So if there are folks out there, organizations, that can actually come up with a better ideal, then it should be considered.
That's a fascinating question, Thomas. I'm still trying to. It hadn't occurred to me that there might be a split in development, much the same way like people would come up with a new wallet.
Which is kind of funny, right? Because this is what it's all about. Like, I think we should strongly support any kind of development from anyone.
Yeah,
So,
it's
like,
a really cool topic.
There's no competition.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here a little bit, because I also, what we talk a lot about is really to make sure that we enable the ecosystem fully, and just like you say for Ethereum, there are different clients. You know, we certainly should build the best tools and document everything so you can build on whatever on top of it. But in essence, you know, you cannot have, you know, two DAI credit systems side by side, right? So I don't think the analogy towards different clients on Ethereum holds totally true.
But wouldn't it be more a case of just making the current DAI system better by having two organizations competing as to which has the best design for it?
Well, when you deploy it, you know, then it's so at some point in time you have to make a choice, whereas on Ethereum you can have different clients, you can make them better, and, you know, compete in that way all the way along, right? So it's the comparison is a little bit different here.
Okay. All right.
We're coming up on 10 minutes left, and there's a couple other questions I wanted to throw your way, Stephen. Has A16Z given any indication of how they plan to use the maker that they've purchased? Are they going to be active members in the governance process, or sort of arm's length? Have they given any signals there?
Oh, extraordinarily active. I mean, they want to be as involved with, you know, Maker as, you know, anyone else is, with the same amount of passion. I mean, they're effectively going to be like core members. They want to know, they're going to want to know pretty much the same thing anyone else that wants to know about MKR. Even if you own half an MKR and you're passionate about it, you basically are now rubbing shoulders with, you know, Andreessen in trying to get certain information in terms of getting certain questions answered, in terms of figuring out what's the way forward, you know, where we are with certain things. They basically, you know, join the crowd that have a, you know, very specific passion for this project.
When we were evaluating the terms of the sale and looking at the different implications, was there a concern that the valuation might have an impact on the current maker price? Was that factored into it?
Are you saying that
once the terms of the agreement were released, there was a lot of concern from various parties about the terms of the deal?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing is, I can't talk to the general behind it, but I think if anyone took a moment to have a look at it and, you know, split it out a little bit and get a sense of what actually was being concluded, they would realize very quickly where the value proposition is. And the fact that the price aspect of it doesn't really reflect the whole value of this particular deal. You know, to say it a little bit more bluntly, the value proposition that everyone sees, it's almost ancillary. The fact that we're partnering up with Andreessen in the full extent of what a partnership means the value there is something that obviously I can express until the cows come home, but it's something that we need to basically show everybody going forward. It's going to become obvious. It's going to be seen clearly. You're going to see the guidance that we get, the clarity that we get, and also what's also very important is the lessons we teach them about Maker are going to be extraordinarily important, because they will be able to then see the permutations of use and functionality, and which will ultimately result in a massive value proposition with respect to their other projects in their portfolio, with respect to other projects outside of their crypto fund but in their stable. The more we teach them about what we're doing, the more we show them where the risks are and how they're handled, where the economic incentives actually drive this thing to work appropriately, the more they will see how they can employ MakerDAO into a vast array of projects and possibilities. So it's kind of a two-way street, between us in terms of this partnership. But ultimately, the expression of true value will have to show itself. I mean, we have to actually give a very definitive view of how this actually has, created real value. For now, it's easy to see from the inside, because you sit with them, I talk to them. I've spoken to their HR, their business development, their marketing, and every one of those components have shown to have such synergistic value that I wish I could just write it all down and go, everyone, look at this. This is amazing. Look at all the things that we're going to be able to do with them. And but the thing is that everyone has only so much bandwidth. And I'm of the opinion that you show by doing. So we've done this deal. Now we're going to go and show what value we're going to manifest from it.
Well, I think that might be a good place to stop, because that was pretty inspiring. Unless there's any absolute last-minute burning questions that anyone wants to ask, I'll begin the wrap-up then. So thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Lanre, for your question. Thanks for Kenny for that insightful reminder about some of the concerns in the infrastructure or the ecosystem. Thank you, Stephen, for your insight again. I think that probably wraps things up for today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.